All right, good morning, everyone. Looks like it's time to get started. Welcome to the New York State Annual ReLeaf Conference and our first virtual conference. My name's Andrea Nieves, and I have the privilege of moderating this morning's first session. Just a few notes about Whova. If you're on the web application, check out the Q&A and the chat function on the right. We'll have a few minutes to ask questions at the end of this session, so drop those in the Q&A, and then I'll be able to read those out. And use the chat to introduce yourself this morning. It's great for everyone to see who else is attending the conference today. On the left, you can see the agenda. Please use that to navigate to the other sessions today and to learn more about our speakers and the subjects they'll be speaking about. If you're on the phone application, all of those functions are on the bottom of the screen. So to officially welcome you to today's conference, please join me in welcoming Gloria Van Duyne, coordinator for the New York State Urban Forestry Program, and Ross Hassinger, forester for the City of Buffalo.
Thanks, Andrea. Welcome everybody to New York's annual ReLeaf Conference. I'm really glad we're able to hold this year's conference, even if it's online. And I can't believe it's been 2 years since our last conference. I noticed a lot of familiar names on the registration list, and I realized that these conferences are much more than learning how to care for and improve our community forests. There is a sense of community and support that's really energizing. And I hope we capture some of that during this conference. The last 16 months have highlighted how essential trees and green spaces are, especially the trees where we live, where we spent and spend most of our time. It also highlighted for some their lack of trees and the need for our continued efforts. We're all working toward that common goal. And our work, considering the last year and a half, our work is more important than ever. And our work collectively affects the health and well-being of millions of people across New York. So I hope you enjoy this conference, learn a lot, and move forward with a renewed energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the City of Buffalo and Region 9 of the ReLeaf Planning Committee, I would like to welcome you to the New York State ReLeaf Annual Conference. Region 9 in Western New York includes Allegheny, Cattaraugus, Chautauqua, Erie, Niagara, and Wyoming counties. While we had hoped that this conference would be in person in the summer of 2020, and then again this summer, we went virtual due to the uncertainty when planning began. Regardless, we're excited to have a full day of speakers and topics, which should be informative and useful to anyone working in community forestry. Every summer when a different DEC region hosts the conference, it's an opportunity not only to gain knowledge and reconnect with friends and colleagues, but also showcase some of the places or projects that region has to offer. Region 9 here in Western New York is no different. The last time we hosted was 2012. And since then, the City of Buffalo has seen a resurgence in our downtown and our waterfront. As traveling away from home safely becomes more common, I encourage you to check out our revitalized downtown area and canal side to enjoy a concert, sporting event, or festival. I would like to thank my fellow Region 9 committee members who have worked hard to bring this all together. Special thanks to Christina McLaughlin and Gloria Van Duyne from DEC for their time and support as well. Thank you again from all of us here in Region 9, and we look forward to seeing you next year in Region 6. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria and Ross. Looks like it's now time to introduce our keynote speaker for today's conference. Today we have the pleasure of having John McNeil join us. He has 38 years of work experience in municipal and provincial government, as well as in the private sector. He was the manager of forestry for the town of Oakville for 29 years, retiring in 2016. He also founded McNeil Urban Forestry, Inc. In 2016, and he provides clients with a unique blend of urban forestry expertise, helping to move their municipal forestry programs from good to great. Take it away, John.
Thank you, Andre, for that warm welcome. Good morning, everybody. I am very happy to be here and with you today. Several reasons. The first reason is that earlier this year, I survived a heart attack. And when I celebrated Arbor Day this year, I did it with a newfound passion, for I was standing around a tree with my grandkids, and I asked them to take a deep, refreshing breath with that medicine produced by trees, oxygen, and let out a breath of gratitude and say, thank you, trees. Now, I've done that ritual for years and years and years, but you better believe this year I meant it in a most profound way, because if one thing my heart attack taught me, as well as my grandkids, for me, every breath is precious. And the second reason I'm happy to be with you today is that in preparing this address to share with you, I reflected on just what a fortunate fellow I have been throughout my career. I mean, how many people get to say that they lived their dream job? Well, I did. For almost 30 years, I was the town forester for the town of Oakville and worked in municipal and urban forestry, living my dream job. In fact, this address today is based on a story from my experience at the town of Oakville. It's a story of championing a cause, a story of how the forestry section at the town of Oakville made a difference by making the community that it serves both greener and ultimately healthier. And it's a story that literally put the town of Oakville on the urban forestry map of Canada. For the town was designated as the forest capital of Canada by the Canadian Forestry Association in 2007, in large part, I believe, for the event that I'm about to talk to you about today. This event transformed the town, and I wish to share with you its story of Oakville, town of Oakville Forestry. But before I do so, let me skip to my takeaway message for those that want the bottom line, and it is this. In the presence of effective leadership, iTree will move your urban forestry program forward. Now, let me illustrate what I mean by that takeaway message. Here in this photograph symbolizes your community and urban forestry program. And if you're like me, you're passionate about your program and you only want the best for it. You want to see it move and attain a higher capabilities, whether that means for you, more trees, more canopy cover, perhaps more volunteers, or even a more sustainable funding mechanism so that you can sustainably manage your urban forest and move it along this road metaphorically towards a brighter, greener future for your program. Now cast your eye on what I've encased the program in. It is a cog. And like any cog in a machine, in order to be efficient, it needs other cogs to spin that wheel and move your program forward. And in my message, I said, iTree. Here is the first cog in the wheel. Most of you, I understand, are familiar with iTree. In fact, some of you, I understand, have used iTree. And if you have, you're part of the 500,000 users spread over 159 countries around the world that are iTree users. iTree is a very powerful weed wheel, but in my proposition, it alone cannot effectively move your urban forestry program forward. No, there is another wheel that's needed in this machine to do so. And that wheel is represented by leadership. Leadership, I have a picture of the Municipal Forestry Institute. Yes, the Society of Municipal Arborists, MFI, which I also understand a lot of you have heard about, and some of you are MFI graduates. And if you are part of the 700 people that have graduated from MFI since its inception in 2006. Leaders building leadership in our industry. So let's begin with the story of how, in the hands of effective leadership, iTree will move your urban forestry program forward. Let's begin with a quick overview of iTree. As you know, it's an ecosystem modeling tool developed by the Forest Service. And as managers of urban forestry, we know that we can affect the outcome of the model. iTree quantifies the form, function, and financial value of the ecosystem services generated by urban trees. And we can have impact on the outcome, the financial aspect of the equation. How? Well, by manipulating and having influence on the input, and that is the form. For example, growing more large stature trees. For as we know, in urban forestry, size counts. Large stature trees produce more biomass, which filter more criteria pollutants, which correspondingly have a higher ecosystem value. So iTree, as a input variable to assess forest structure and model the benefits and costs, essentially provides input and informs the development of urban forest management plans. As you can see from this image, we have a loop system, a feedback loop. Why? Well, as you know, we plant trees for future generations. Managing trees is a long-term proposition. And so it is incumbent upon us as sustainable, in order to sustainably manage our urban forest, to build in a feedback loop in order to help us take a pause and at appropriate times, monitor and measure our direction and making sure that we are attaining our goals set out in our forest management plan. And iTree helps us beautifully undertake this. Now, for those of you that have had the pleasure of listening to David Nowak talk about iTree, you know that David has a knack for taking the complex and simplifying it. And one day, Dave said to me, John, iTree is a tool, like a hammer. We, the Forest Service, provide the tool, and you, the municipality, you have to build with it. Aha, I said, iTree is like this hammer. Dave just said that. All I have to do is build with it. Sounds simple enough. But wait a minute. I worked in municipal urban forestry for 30 years, and I know from speaking with my colleagues in the field, the pressures that can build in the domain when you are faced with a high-profile project to deliver to the mayor, members of council, senior management team, key stakeholders, members of the general public, and other interest groups. The pressure's on, and I know I'm by no means alone when I cite the following questions when you embark on the beginning of an iTree project. And the questions are, well, what am I going to build? And how am I going to build it? And do I have the competence to build with it? Do I have the confidence to see the project through? And so with these serious questions gnawing in the back of my mind, the town of Oakville partnered with these 3 other organizations and undertook an iTree eco project in 2005. Now, at that time, I had been the town forester for some 2 decades, so I felt confident in doing a situational analysis as we embarked on undertaking an iTree eco project. And I assessed where forestry stood at the time, sort of a snapshot of our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I assessed our strengths to include that we had a few favorable partnerships. For example, we had a favorable partnership with our local hydro utility. We, in fact, the forestry section, undertook the annual line clearing on behalf of the local hydro utility. But our weaknesses included that we did not have an urban forest management plan. We had no strategic direction. Opportunities on the horizon included in the province of Ontario, we had just held municipal elections, and the community of Oakville had just elected a new mayor, and he came from the Clean Air Coalition. So he had a background in advocating for air pollution reduction. Threats, well, we had heard about this new insect in the Detroit-Windsor area called the emerald ash borer, but we didn't have a clue about what was in store for us in the years to come. So that was the situation as we were on the threshold of doing our iTree project in 2005. This was a project that we decided to do in-house. We hired seasonal staff from the Faculty of Forestry and seconded some staff, full-time staff, to act as crew leaders. And we overachieved, if you will. We actually put in almost 400 iTree eco plots throughout the corporation that summer. And come the fall of that year, when we got the data set back from the Forest Service, we started looking for trends and assessing the data. And a few things jumped out at us. One of the first was that although Oakville's 1.9 million trees did not filter much of the pollution coming into our air shed at the time from the Ohio Valley Industrial Complex, what it did achieve was that it filtered the majority of locally sourced pollutants. That was something, that fact jumped right out at everyone that was looking at the data. For example, particulate matter 10 and sulfur dioxide. This was astounding. Keep in mind the context that back then, I think we were the 2nd municipality in the whole country of Canada to do an iTree eco study, and the first in our region, and to quantify from a scientifically valid, peer-reviewed model that trees effectively provided ecological services. And here was the value. And here was the fact that they actually took care of our own pollution that we generated in our community. In fact, it would become the inspiration for our staff report, Oakville's Urban Forest, Our Solution to Our Pollution. We also used the iTree Grow Out module and forecasted the future for the urban forest. Why? Well, again, because as I said earlier, managing trees is a long-term proposition, and we do so for future generations. So we modeled what the town of Oakville's urban forest would look like in the years to come. And one of the things with some reasonable assumptions that we put into the model showed us was that the town's canopy cover had the potential to move from its current rate of just under 30% to 40%. And I ask you to remember that number, 40%, because I'm going to come back to it a little bit later on in my presentation. This would take us now in a timeline to the winter of 2006. We collected the data, we had the data set come back, we looked for trends in the data, we'd done some forecasting, and it was time for me to work on developing my report. But as fate would have it, at the same time that I was working on the beginnings of my staff report, I was chosen to participate in the Municipal Forestry Institute. And it would change the whole course of where our iTree Eco Project would go. It would help us move towards attaining and moving our urban forestry program forward in a way that I could not have predicted. The Society of Municipal Arborists developed the Municipal Forestry Institute, and I was fortunate enough to be part of the first graduating class in 2006. For those of you MFI grads out there, I hope you can re-energize yourself and connect through your mind, your memory of your time at MFI. It's a special time. It's a powerful training opportunity. Leaders training leaders in our industry. MFI consists of a week-long in-house session with upwards of 50 to 60 different individuals from all over the world come together. And we come together as strangers, but we leave the week embraced as friends because we've gone through the week together, learning from the teaching cadre and moving ourselves forward, because MFI nurtures the capacity for growth, for personal growth that is within each of us. And it embraces that potential that is there within each of us. And I know that I can speak for the other MFIers on the call, that it is indeed life-changing. Now, MFI is based on the premise that the practicing urban forester comes into MFI, the experienced urban forester, with sufficient information about the scientific aspect of trees. I did, because I had worked in the field for some 2 decades, and I felt quite competent and comfortable in that role. But what I needed to learn about was in a whole other aspect of study, fields of leadership, strategic thinking, and communications, in sort of the soft science of trees, if you will. Why? Well, because as urban forestry leaders, we are in a unique position. We are in a unique position to influence decision-making processes in our organization. And we must learn to influence those decisions effectively in order to advance our urban forestry program forward. And this is what we learn at MFI so effectively, is to how to become people of influence. What I soon realized within my first while at MFI was that I really had to focus and master this course in tree politics. Now, what do we mean by politics? If I asked you the question, do you feel that you are engaged in tree politics as a regular course of your job? Well, the typical reaction is to recoil at the thought of working in politics because of the traditional notion that we ascribe to that term, politics. Say, no, I don't play politics. That's not something I get into. But at MFI, we look at politics through a different lens. We look at it as the often internally conflicting interrelationships amongst people. When people get together, there's often conflict. Aha, you now say, I can relate to that. I deal with conflicts an awful lot in my job, particularly when I'm trying to sell trees to certain groups. Anne Garrido, in her book, Redeeming Conflict, says, when we nurture our skills at doing conflict well, we nourish life in abundance. When we nurture our skills at doing conflict well, we nourish life in abundance. That is the mindset that we encourage at MFI for effective leaders, nourishing life in abundance and recognizing that conflict is inevitable when humans come together. But doing conflict well, in working towards a win-win situation, if you will, is a skill set. And it's a necessary and effective skill set for urban forestry leaders to master and implement. Let me give you a crash course, an introduction to tree politics that we do at the Municipal Forestry Institute, where I believe in MFI so much that I, for the last 4 years, have served as a member of the volunteer teaching cadre. Tree politics, then, is actively managing yourself and others to influence government decision-making process in the realm of urban forestry. In other words, to move that wheel forward down the proverbial road towards a brighter and greener future. Let's look at what MFI teaches in terms of tree politics. Our first tool of influence is political capital. Political capital is the personal resources available to you to use to influence the decision-making process. What are your personal resources, you may ask? Your reputation and your integrity. When you reflect on it for a moment, our integrity is perhaps the only thing in our lives that we have complete control over for only our decisions. And our decisions alone create our integrity. Leaders can't accomplish their goals without a broad public support. And this is why political capital is so important, because in today's knowledge economy, control has less to do with power and control than it has to do with influence. And we gain that influence through political capital. Let me share with you my pleasant surprise to see the rise of the political capital of the forestry section. In the time following the approval of Oakville's urban forest, our solution to our pollution by Oakville Town Council in 2006, I was amazed to see the political capital of the forestry section rise. Like a tree planted in a hospitable environment, and the leader grows up towards the sun and the branches move out and blossom and more biomass, and the tree gets fuller and larger and bigger. And that was the influence the forestry section experienced through our political capital rising. Why? Well, in part, I believe it was because the iTree project received very favorable reception by the mayor and town council. Senior management sat up and noticed this. That effect cascaded on to department heads. That effect cascaded on to senior managers and to frontline staff. All of a sudden, forestry was starting to get invitations to sit at a table, certain meetings, certain task groups that in the past were not open to us. Doors were starting to open. It was fascinating to watch human behavior play out. How do we respond, effective leaders, to our environment? Well, at MFI, we believe that leadership is not a throne upon which we sit. Rather, leadership is a stone that we are the first to pick up and carry. Leadership is a stone that we are the first to pick up and carry. But how, you may ask, do effective leaders know which stone to pick up and when to carry it? For example, how did I know that the time was appropriate to begin an iTree eco project? And how do leaders maintain their confidence in the face of inevitable obstacles, which will pose challenges during the undertaking of any project? How do we maintain our confidence and commitment to seeing our vision through? At MFI, we believe the answers to these questions, this leadership journey, if you will, for it is a journey over time, begins within each of us. And it begins within each of us here, within our minds. For it is our minds that are powerful. It is our minds that create the attitude which is conducive to positively answering those questions I just posed to you. At MFI, another one of our leadership concepts is encouraging the development for aspiring leaders to develop the right attitude. Let me ask you to engage with me now in a short, simple exercise to demonstrate to yourself the power of your mind. All you're going to have to do is breathe. It's like this. We'll take a short, deep breath together. Say to a 4 count if that feels comfortable to you. 3, 4. Pause, hold it, and breathe it out to an even longer count. Say to perhaps a 6 count if that feels comfortable to you, like this. 5, 6. Remember, every breath is precious. And we find that this exercise is enhanced if we close our eyes while we breathe to help us focus. Please join with me if you feel comfortable closing your eyes and breathe. That's all you have to do. That's all I ask. In. Please begin. From as far back as we can remember, we have had people in our lives, people that have inspired us, people that taught us valuable lessons. Have you had someone in your life that communicated your worth and your potential so clearly that it profoundly influenced your life? Reflect for a moment on some of these magnificent leaders, people that have selflessly served, expecting nothing in return, and influenced us on our journey to where we are today. Perhaps a friend that showed us how much they appreciate us being there for them. A mentor that modeled a trait that we have now adopted. A stranger that we will never forget. Picture them. Remember how they made you feel. Perhaps feelings of gratitude, love, kindness. Thank them. For some of you, your mind has just taken you on a memorable journey. For others, perhaps not. Either way, you have demonstrated just how powerful your mind is. You alone chose just now to tune me in or tune me out. Your mind and no one else's determined your actions. Remember, leadership is a choice that these magnificent people made. Never forget the impact it had on your life. Slowly return your breathing to normal and open your eyes. Welcome back. Thank you for participating with me. I hope that you demonstrated to yourself the power of your mind just now. Or I can't believe that. I'd rehearsed this so many times, I had it down set. That's funny. I hope that you demonstrated to yourself the power of your mind just now. Because for effective leaders, it's so important to be able, when you inevitably hit the inevitable conflicts in your life, those obstacles, those proverbial end of trail, that you adopt the right attitude and focus on your mind to see the big, blue, bright beauty beyond, that potential that you can grasp and realize. That's what we encourage at the Municipal Forestry Institute. At the end of our week long at MFI, some of us are exhausted, some of us are ecstatic, some of us want another whole week to go by, some of us just want to get home and get back to our emails. But the teaching cadre asks us to reflect on our last day and to commit to a vision of where we would like to take our urban forestry program when we get back to our home community or home municipality. And at MFI, we call that vision a BHAG, which sounds kind of novel, doesn't it, to the uninformed. BHAG stands for Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal. And I'd like to share with you the BHAG that I wrote on my last day at MFI, way back on my 2006. And that was to demonstrate to my community and beyond Oakville that the urban forest contributes towards a healthy community, and for the town's urban forest program to realize its potential. I returned to the town of Oakville with a changed mindset, and I recommitted myself to working on Oakville's urban forest, our solution to our pollution, which is a document that to this day, the Forest Service flags as one of the most effective iTree eco projects in the world. I was committed that this report would be a living, breathing project. For as Dave Nowak says, if your iTree report is simply going to sit on the shelf, don't even bother undertaking an iTree project. And I was committed based on the lessons learned at MFI that I realized that I had to change direction in this report. At first, it was going to be entirely about trees and how great trees are. But I realized that I had to do something in addition to that. And I had to demonstrate the power of people. Yes, the power of people in order to help trees be as great as they are. What do I mean by that? Well, we coined this formula in our report that reads street tree habitat equals zoning and engineering. Street tree habitat equals zoning and engineering. This formula recognizes the power of people. If you picture a arborist to be like a painter, and this painter is about to paint a masterpiece on a canvas, but the painter cannot take credit for the canvas. No, the canvas is built by others. And in the case of urban forestry, there's a lot of others that contribute towards building this canvas that the arborist is about to paint this masterful urban forest picture upon. And two of the most important other people that are important for this are the planner and the engineer. Need proof? Well, look at this photograph. Study the trees growing out by the curb on the right-hand side near the parked vehicles. They are planted in the traditional concrete cutout or tree coffin as I derisively call it. They're struggling in compacted, nutrient-poor, dry soils, and their outgrowth performance reflects that. They're not doing very well. Contrast their performance with their counterparts to the left of them, on the left-hand side of the image. These trees are doing substantially better. Why? The power of people. In this case, first, the planner, through the zoning ordinance, or bylaws, we would call it in Canada, there's a generous building front yard setback to provide for a double row of trees in the first place and to provide room for the canopy to ultimately thrive. In contrast to the building in the background, which does not have a generous front yard setback, it's slammed up close near the curb. And secondly, the engineer. The engineer has signed off on an engineering road cross section, which includes engineered soils. And for those of you familiar with that technical term, engineered soils are a solution to help address compaction and produce an uncompacted contiguous corridor underground that allows for root growth and development, which is reflected in good biomass development in the canopy. The power of people. It would take time, but the forestry section applied the principles of tree politics throughout the corporation, and we knocked on the doors of the planning and engineering staff. And gradually, over time, we helped open their eyes to the realization that some of their projects could be more effectively accomplished in their objectives through trees. Let me illustrate to you the power of tree politics. How did the planning department respond? Well, they became a veritable champion for trees. Each municipality in Ontario is required to have an official plan, the #1 document for all municipalities, and it's up for review every 5 years. And in 2009, 3 years after Oakville Town Council approved Oakville's urban forest, our solution to our pollution. Look at this, the planning department produced a treasure trove for trees in their new official plan, recognizing with policies, trees as green infrastructure. This was very important. We could leverage this policy of green infrastructure very effectively. Private tree protection provisions were made for an ordinance to focus on private large stature trees. And you know the reason why. We've gone over this earlier, that in urban forestry size counts. So large trees were identified as needing particular attention. And look at this. Remember I asked you to remember that 40% number? Here it appears again. Canopy cover objective taken from the iTree Grow Out module was embraced as a corporate commitment. How serious a commitment? Well, look at what the planning department continued to do with their next huge project. This was the last remaining tract of agricultural land, 7,000 acres that would ultimately house about 20,000 people and bring Oakville's population to 250,000. This master plan for this final grow out of the town of Oakville, the planning department required the development community to undertake a canopy cover plan and canopy calculation program. Why? To require that the developers could show how each of their M plans or plans of subdivision contributed towards the canopy cover commitment of 40%. And they even broke this down by minimal attainment targets by zoning upon forestry's recommendation. They endorsed this step-by-step building block for how to each zoning in the zoning ordinance could be regulated. For those of you who are MFI graduates, I hope you'll recognize this as the technique of preaching to the choir. Preaching to the choir is when forestry, as the preacher, sends a message to the choir. In this case, it was how to grow 40% canopy cover. The choir, in turn, takes that message and turns around and sings it to their congregation, in this case, the development community. To this day, I fondly remember that music. It was the sweetest sound. When you have another department advocating on your behalf, it's magical. As I said, I returned from the town, from MFI with a changed mindset. And I spent time in quiet reflection, as we're encouraged to do at MFI as effective leaders. And I realized that when I reflected on our other partnerships, that some of them weren't quite so favorable. One of those was with engineering. And I had to recognize my responsibility as partially responsible for that. But I also acknowledged that I could be part of the solution. And we brainstormed at our forestry management team and came up with identifying a champion for the engineering department. This was a forestry staff member who was intelligent, had a good head for figures, could dispassionately converse with his colleagues in engineering and help them see how some of their goals could be more effectively accomplished through trees. He, in a sense, learned to communicate in engineering. He could speak engineering, and he did it quite effectively, to the point where new engineering road cross sections requiring, as a corporate standard, engineered soils on all our main streets were adopted, with policies that would require, before engineering would issue road occupancy permits to utilities, an arborist report had to be prepared to our satisfaction. That required new monies to flow to forestry for new permanent staffing to look at and review those road occupancy permits and arborist reports, and new staffing to implement that private tree ordinance, and a commitment to updating our iTree eco study in 10 years. Why? Well, because as we already talked about, it's a self-feedback loop. We had to look at 10 years' time, we had to take a time out and see if we're on the right track. And we did that by going back to all 400 plots and remeasuring those iTree eco plots. Upon reflection, I see that the applying tree politics helped the forestry section grow many favorable partnerships. And we used that to shore up our weaknesses. Council identified an urban forest management plan and approved one in 2008. It also helped us address the looming threat. Emerald ash borer was now washing ashore, and Council approved an ash canopy conservation program, which set as a target to conserve 75% of the municipal ash canopy, which accounted for almost 10% of Oakville's canopy cover. Why? Well, thanks to iTree. iTree identified the opportunity cost of losing our ash tree canopy, and it became apparent that we needed a program to conserve it. Remember that BHAG that I shared with you that I wrote back in 2006? Well, in Ontario, the Municipal Act is legislation that governs all municipalities, all 400 municipalities. It's like state level legislation. And 10 years after forestry joined an advocacy group called Green Infrastructure Ontario for legislative change at the provincial level, the Municipal Act was amended as follows. A municipality shall adopt policies with respect to the following: the manner in which the municipality will protect and enhance the tree canopy and natural vegetation in the municipality. Sometimes BHAGs take a while to attain. In review, in conclusion, I would say what we built was a bridge connecting trees and people. And we know from our course in tree politics just how critical it is to nourish that relationship in order to move our urban forestry program forward. And so I can say unequivocally to you today that Oakville Forestry is living proof that in the hands of effective leadership, iTree will move your urban forestry program forward. I'd like to thank Jerry LaHaye and the volunteer teaching cadre at MFI for developing the program, and David Nowak and his staff at the Forest Service for developing iTree, and both organizations for sharing their work with the world. I know from my interaction with some of you at the Urban Forestry Council that Your iTree tool is in good hands, and this gives me great hope for the future of urban forestry in your community. I wish each of you well in moving your urban forestry program forward in your home and in your community. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, John. What a wonderful presentation. I will just say that I laughed, I cried. And looks like we have a couple of questions. So first from Jeannie Abrams, how can you require 75% preservation of the ash canopy if the trees are already infected?
Because we jumped on board before they were already infected in some cases. It's a very interesting, it's a whole presentation on its own about our ash tree management. We put up pheromone traps. So we had a count of the ash tree population in every neighborhood in Oakville on a grid system. So we knew where on that bell curve, you know, that the death curve, the McKnight death curve, we knew where we were. And even though an ash tree can be infected, we know from using triazine, the biological pesticide, that it kills the instar within the first larval stage. So it prevents the larvae from getting to the 3rd and 4th stages where it does all its serious damage. So even though a tree is, quote, infected, it can still come through that damage. In some cases, not in every case. And like I said, we didn't conserve all the canopy. It was 75%, and it was based on a assessment of the structure of the trees too. Some couldn't be, but many were. Hope that answers your question.
That's awesome. Early intervention is so important. What's your favorite resource for learning to manage conflict?
Anne Garrido's Redeeming Conflict that I quoted. And if you ever get to see Anne Garrido do a presentation, she came to my wife's workplace a few years ago, and I got myself invited to her presentation. Anne Garrido, she's a marvelous teacher.
Great, we'll try and put that in the chat so people can look it up. Last question so far, what do you think is the biggest obstacle to creating a sustainable urban forestry program?
Your mind, your attitude.
All right. Thanks so much. We have a 10-minute break coming up. There's an opportunity to socialize and say hello to everybody who's attending the conference. Thank you so much, John, for opening this up. Again, it was a really wonderful presentation. And just for everybody, you can navigate to the next sessions using the agenda. So yeah, check out what we have going on, check out our speakers, and have a great rest of your conference, everybody. See you soon.